Dennis, and William and Cecilia. It's an honor for me to be with you this evening. And one of the first things I want to say is that I tell you that at the time of questions, you may ask me anything. I always say to people, it's your time to find out and ask everything you wanted to know, and especially also about sisters, and we're afraid to ask. So it's your chance. I've tried to lie and I cannot, so everything that I say will be the truth and honest. One of the things that is uppermost for me as a Roman Catholic is the fact that there are 6 people of color that are up for canonization. And I bring to your knowledge tonight would be, today would be the feast of Elizabeth Lang, because in the Roman Catholic Church, feast days are usually the day that the person dies. And Elizabeth Lang died on February the 3rd in 1882. So today would be her feast day if she was canonized. And what I decided to do is, there's a book that I call my second Bible, and it's a book that's called Black Pearls. And in it are meditations for each day for the people. And today, February 3rd, the title is Time. And I was telling Dennis and William that my favorite scripture at this particular point is Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter, verses 1 to 8. And I have the particular version of the Bible that I have is more like a textbook kind of thing. And it was interesting to me. I went to the scripture, and there is the Chinese Book of the Way. It's called the Tao Te Ching, and the translation of their time is, I'm going to read it, because I feel that the translation from this is very apropos to our subject and apropos to some of the things we need to think about as we're thinking about racial healing and for reconciliation. And the version of the Asian version is, there's a time for being ahead, a time for being behind, a time for being in motion, a time for being at rest, a time for being vigorous, a time for being exhausted, a time for being safe, and a time for being in danger. And as we think about that, and as we think of our conversations that we're having on healing and reconciliation, the thing that comes to me is that this is the time for each one of us on this call to really think, what are we personally, individually, intentionally going to do and be about as we think about racial healing and racial reconciliation. As I thought about how I would deal with this and how I would look at it, I chose sometimes in my life that have an impact on me, that have helped me to reflect, have made me very disturbed and angry, and helped me to look at being an activist, have helped me to be willing to put my life on the line, have helped me or have how I have experienced times of racist things done against me. So that's what I thought I'd talk about. the first thing that I would like to say is that the fact of me being a Roman Catholic, and I'm very particular about language, the fact that I'm a Roman Catholic is because my great-grandfather was a slave for the Jesuit priests in Georgetown. And we know a lot has been happening with reconciliation with the Jesuits and with the slave, the ancestors of the slaves with the Jesuits. But that is where my Catholicism, and my great-grandfather was one of 12 children, and every one of those 12 children was a baptized Roman Catholic. And their baptismal records are at Holy Trinity Church, the famous church that the presidents and those Roman Catholics are in politics. That's where they go to church. And my great-grandfather and his siblings, their baptismal records are there. A funny thing that I would say to you is I wonder whether my great-grandmother was a slave for the Visitation Sisters, because the job that my great-grandfather had was to drive the priests. It wasn't to drive, it was probably, horse and buggy, but it was taking the priests to the Visitation Convent for Mass every day. And you know that in those days, there was no way that the slaves were ever going to interact, so that when the priest is saying Mass for the Visitation Sisters, who we find out had slaves, that probably my great-grandfather had to interact with the slaves. So a funny thing that I would know, and I'm not going to spend time to search it, but the funny thing would be is if my great-grandmother might have been one of the slaves for the Visitation Sisters, and that when my grandfather was taking time in between, that he met her, and that's how it came. I don't know, but that's a thought and something to think about. The next time that I want to say that had an impact on me is in 1947. And that was, I was in 3rd grade at a predominantly white school in Philadelphia. There were about 2,000 students in the school. And of those 2,000, there were probably only about 14. And at that time in the 47, we would probably have said colored or Negro children. And I remember at 3rd grade, in those days, the boys were separated from the girls. So the girls were on one side of the church and the boys were on the other. And we sat as in class, we sat in order of class. We did not sit with our families in those days. And I remember in 3rd grade going up to communion, and therefore the girls beside me were all white. And the priest passed me by and did not give me communion. That impacted me, and I remember that. And I was like 7 years old then, but I remember that through the days. The next thing that had impact, and I remember, and Dennis mentioned this, that in 1956, I became the first African-American girl in Philadelphia to be able to enter a Philadelphia community. And many communities, probably at least 40 or 50 different communities of women religious in Philadelphia at that time. At that time, any person of color, any African-American woman could not enter a community in Philadelphia. In 1945 and 1946, my mother's two youngest sisters wanted to become sisters. They could not enter any community in Philadelphia. And though it was not until 1956 that I entered the Sisters of Mercy. And language is important. So you cannot say that I entered the Sisters of Mercy and I integrated the Sisters of Mercy. I did not integrate them. For me, integration means 50-50, 40-60. I desegregated the Sisters of Mercy. And therefore I became the first African-American girl to be able to enter a community in Philadelphia of all the years. And there are communities, and there were communities in Philadelphia that were founded to minister to the people of color, but the community, they could not enter the community in 1945 and 46. The next date that I'm going to take is 1968, had a big impact on my life. In 1968 was the foundation of the National Black Sisters Conference. And in a Sister of Mercy in Pittsburgh asked her superior, her community superior, if she could call all of the Black sisters to come to Pittsburgh and be at a conference. And I was, at that time, I was in Philadelphia and ministry, and my superior sent me to the conference. Two of us from Philadelphia went to the conference. And at that conference, the planning and the experiences we had was to be able to have sessions and talks and speakers. We had a young gentleman, about 16 or 17, that was a member of the gang. We heard what was happening in the schools around the nation with Black children. And at that conference, I decided, when I left there, I decided I needed to be doing more for the people of color. I needed to be doing more for African Americans. I needed to be doing more for Black people. And gratefully, it was after Vatican II, which was in 1964, which changed a lot of ways of living and lifestyles and opening ministries and allowing women religious to be able to really minister people more closely. And really in Vatican II, the whole thing was to really look at the humanity of Jesus and really say that we needed to really deal not just with the soul, but we really needed to deal with the body of people. And when I came home, I tell, and you know, when I look back, I think I did this in 1968. But when I came back from the Black Sisters Conference, I had heard about a rally of the Black Panthers at the Church of the Advocate, which is an Episcopalian church in Philadelphia. And it really, the historical fact is the Church of the Advocate is the place where the six women, the first women were ordained priests for the Episcopalian church in that church. And the rally took place, and I went to that rally. I wasn't a driver, but my cousin picked me up, and we went to the rally of the Black Panther member. And when I look back, I think, that was a moment in history, a moment in time, and something that really affected me and carried on what I feel has helped me over these years since then to really see that I need to be involved with what's happening with all people, and especially with people of color. The next thing that I would mention is 1990. And 1990 was the fact when I was in Virginia. I came to Virginia in 1981. And in 1990, I was the head of the Office for Black Catholics. And Bishop Sullivan was the Bishop of Richmond. And the priest that was the pastor at St. Elizabeth's, wanted to go and he wasn't a priest, he was a brother, and he wanted to go. No, I'm sorry, he was a priest. In 1989, he was a priest. So in 1990, he wanted to go and do something with the Benedictines. He wanted to go into the monastery. And so he was the pastor of St. Elizabeth's. So Bishop Sullivan asked me, would I do that? Would I become the head of St. Elizabeth's? And it's funny because it took me about a month to really reflect and really see and discern. And it was almost at the point he was going to give up on me and think that I didn't want to do it. But I did, I said, yes, I would do that. And so in 1990, I became the first African-American woman to be the head of the Catholic Church in the United States. And I take that, it's a special time for me, because not only did it impacted my life and let me see and hold on and to get another aspect of really involved in the ministry with people and really pastorally learning about people. But it also, I got a letter from a woman in Chicago that I don't know. Didn't know her name, didn't know anything about her. But in her letter, she wrote to me that she was going to leave the Catholic Church. But when that news got out that I was going to be the head of a church and be a leader, a woman as a leader in a parish, she said that helped to encourage her to remain. And so that is an impactful thing for me. The funny thing about that occasion of being the first is that some of you might know this, but the thing about that is I was a question of jeopardy in 1990. The question is, who is the first African-American woman to be the head of a Catholic Church in the United States? And the answer is Cora Billings. The last thing that I want to say with regard to dates is in 2019, I received an honorary doctorate from Villanova University, and that's my alma mater. But the thing that impacts me with that is when the president wrote to see if I would accept it, he said to me that I held the virtues and the charism of Villanova, that's why they wanted to honor me. And the virtues and the charism are unity, truth, and love. And those are three qualities that I feel are very, very important when we're dealing with the idea of relationships, when we're looking at reconciliation, and when we're looking at being anti-racist. The unity, the truth, and the love. And I feel that those three are three qualities that enable us to be the people and to be the real disciples and ambassadors of Jesus. And so those are some of the important, or some of the dates that impacted my life, and some of the dates that I feel are, are important, and some of the things. In talking about relationships and in talking about reconciliation, we cannot be reconciled with someone unless we really know them. And one of the things that I think is a characteristic that people in the United States need to get more of is that we have to become more listening people and taking time. We can go down the street and pass someone, we'll smile, we'll say, have a happy day, and how are you? And before they can answer, we're halfway down the block. We're not listening, we don't really care. And so I feel that that is the listening, the really caring, and the really ability to take time and make time intentionally. Those are some of the things that I feel are the beginning ways of us being able to reconcile in order for us to be able to really heal. And we're not going to be able to heal people, and we can't reconcile unless we know them. And we can't know them unless we take time. And we have to really be people. And if we're from the United States, we have to be people that are going to take time, because the culture of the United States from the very beginning with the revolution is not to take time, and always to be before, not wanting to spend time with ourselves, but really just getting rid and pushing forth and going forward. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking and let you reflect and let you ask me anything you ever wanted to ask and were afraid to, or anything that I did not clarify and you need more. So I'm through. Okay.